I still remember the day I saw it. I pulled up to my property, the land I had spent years saving and dreaming about, only to find a brand new house sitting squarely in the middle of it. My jaw dropped. My first thought was disbelief. Surely it couldn't be real. I had never sold the land, never given anyone permission to build, and definitely hadn't signed off on any HOA project. Yet there it was, a fully finished 3-bedroom house, looking absurdly out of place, as if it had grown overnight. The HOA, I'd been on good terms with them before, claimed it was a community improvement. Their paperwork insisted they had the right to build on what they called vacant common-use plots. But when I checked the deed, every square inch clearly belonged to me. My blood boiled. My private property had been invaded, and someone had the audacity to treat it like theirs. I went to the HOA office, determined to get answers. The secretary tried to explain politely that the board had misunderstood the boundaries and meant no harm. Misunderstood? No harm? I could almost laugh at the absurdity if I wasn't so furious. Every day I had envisioned this land as my future, a place for my family, my garden, my sanctuary, and now a stranger's house was sitting right on it, threatening all my plans. I hired a property lawyer immediately. He confirmed what I had already suspected. The HOA had no legal claim, and this construction was an outright violation. But legal battles are slow, and I didn't want to wait while this house loomed on my land. Every day I passed it, I felt like my control, my rights, and my dignity were being trampled. It was more than an inconvenience. It was personal. After days of negotiations, letters, and threats that went nowhere, I realized they weren't taking me seriously. The HOA's arrogance was astonishing. They assumed I'd simply accept their mistake, let the house stand, and eventually pay them for whatever nonsense fees they might claim. I couldn't let that happen. My options were limited, but my mind raced through every possible scenario. I knew I had to act, and act decisively. I looked at the house one evening, the sunset casting long shadows across my property, and made a choice that would change everything. I would take matters into my own hands, reclaim what was rightfully mine, and make them pay for every violation, every insult, every day of stress they had caused. The next morning, I returned to my property with a notebook and a pen. I had to plan carefully. This wasn't just about anger. This was about strategy. The HOA had overstepped in a big way, and I couldn't afford mistakes. I started by taking detailed photos of the house, measuring its exact position on my land, and comparing it to the official property boundaries. Every corner, every foot mattered. I knew the more evidence I had, the stronger my position would be if this went to court. I reached out to a contractor friend I trusted. "If this were your property, what would you do?" I asked. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. I could see the hesitation. "You can't just tear it down yourself," he said carefully. "That's technically destruction of property." I nodded, knowing he was right. But I had an idea brewing, one that would be calculated, legal, and irreversible if I did it the right way. I started digging into the HOA's finances, bylaws, and insurance policies. The more I researched, the more I realized how sloppy they had been. Their community improvement claim wasn't just unauthorized, it was illegal. They had skipped permits, ignored zoning laws, and apparently assumed no one would check. That was their mistake. They didn't count on someone like me, someone willing to push back, someone willing to hold them accountable. Meanwhile, I began documenting every interaction with them. Emails, calls, meetings, I recorded everything. Every admission of fault, every weak excuse, every attempt to gaslight me became a piece of the puzzle. I could already see the story forming. Their arrogance, my evidence, and the eventual consequences. I also considered the optics. If this went to court, the judge or jury would need to understand the scale of their violation. That meant showing not just the legal proof, but the emotional and practical impact of having a stranger's house on my land. I drafted a narrative. How I had envisioned my property, how their actions disrupted my life, and how they forced me to take extraordinary measures to reclaim what was mine. By the end of the week, I had a plan that felt daring but calculated. I wouldn't act recklessly, but I wouldn't let the HOA drag me through endless bureaucratic delays either. I knew the risks, but I also knew the potential reward. Reclaiming my land, sending a clear message, and potentially forcing them to compensate for the audacity of their actions. That night, I stood at the edge of my property, looking at the house in its awkward, intrusive position. I felt a strange mix of anger, determination, and anticipation. I wasn't just reclaiming land. I was preparing for justice on my terms. The final notice went out on a Monday morning. My lawyer sent it by certified mail, email, and hand delivery to the HOA office. The message was simple and direct. They had 10 days to remove the structure from my land, or I would take lawful action to restore my property to its original condition. No more negotiations, no more excuses. Their response came 3 days later, and it was laughable. The HOA board claimed removing the house would be financially inconvenient and asked for more time, suggesting we work toward a mutually beneficial resolution. That was the moment I knew they still didn't understand the situation. My rights weren't negotiable, and my land wasn't a bargaining chip. On day 11, I moved forward. I hired a licensed demolition company, one that specialized in legal removals tied to property disputes. Every permit was checked, every document verified. The crew reviewed my deed, the survey, and the legal notice before agreeing to proceed. I made sure everything was airtight. If the HOA planned to challenge me, I wanted nothing left to chance. When the machines arrived, a small crowd gathered. Neighbors, HOA representatives, even someone filming on their phone. The HOA president showed up in a panic, shouting that I couldn't do this. I calmly handed him copies of the documents and told him he had plenty of chances to fix it himself. He stood there, stunned, as the first wall came down. I won't lie. Watching that house come apart was surreal. It wasn't joy I felt exactly. It was relief. With every section removed, it felt like my property and my dignity was being restored. The structure that had symbolized arrogance and entitlement was gone piece by piece, reduced to debris hauled away by the end of the day. The aftermath was immediate. The HOA's legal team flooded my inbox with threats, claiming damages, losses, and reckless behavior. But my lawyer was ready. We countered with evidence: illegal construction, trespass, loss of land use, emotional distress, and violation of zoning laws. What they thought would intimidate me quickly turned into a nightmare for them. As discovery began, the truth spilled out. Internal HOA emails revealed they knew the land ownership was unclear, but chose to build anyway to save time. Insurance refused to cover their mistake. Board members turned on each other. What started as a simple power move had become a massive liability. By the time the case reached mediation, the HOA wasn't fighting anymore. They were desperate. They knew the damage they'd caused went far beyond the cost of a house, and I wasn't done yet. Mediation day felt like walking into a battlefield, but I was calm. The HOA representatives arrived, visibly uneasy, while my lawyer and I had our files neatly organized: evidence, surveys, emails, and photographs. Every misstep they had made was documented, every claim they thought would protect them exposed. I had turned their arrogance into leverage. The mediator opened with formalities, but the tension was thick. The HOA tried to argue that removing the house and paying damages was excessive and unfair. I listened quietly, letting my lawyer present the facts. The proof was overwhelming: illegal construction, trespass, violation of zoning laws, disruption to my property, and emotional distress. Even a casual observer could see that I had every right on my side. What happened next was almost poetic. The HOA's legal team started negotiating, not to fight, but to limit their losses. They offered partial compensation at first, hoping I would settle. I smiled politely, but shook my head. I wasn't interested in half measures. They had taken my land, my plans, and my peace of mind. This wasn't about money alone. It was about accountability. After hours of back and forth, they finally agreed to a full settlement. The HOA would pay $1.2 million in damages, covering the value of the destroyed house, legal fees, and additional compensation for the stress and inconvenience they had caused. It was more than I expected, and yet it felt completely justified. They had assumed I would back down. They had underestimated me. And now, justice had been served. The settlement came with one final condition, a formal apology from the HOA to be recorded publicly. I had them acknowledge their wrongdoing, admit they had no right to build on my land, and commit to never attempting such an action again. That statement, printed and circulated in community notices, felt like the ultimate vindication. The message was clear. No one, not even a powerful HOA, could trample on my property or my rights. Standing on my land afterward, I looked at the empty space where the house had been. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to imagine the future I had always planned, now free from interference. I realized the experience had taught me something beyond property law. Courage, persistence, and preparation can turn even the most shocking injustice into a victory. From that day forward, whenever I shared the story, people would ask how I did it. I tell them simply, know your rights, document everything, act decisively, and don't let anyone intimidate you. The house may have been built without permission, but I had taken it down with strategy, patience, and principle, and turned a moment of anger into a life-changing triumph. Enjoying this wild story about reclaiming my land from an HOA? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life legal battles and property stories. Also, give this a like if you found it satisfying and drop a comment below. What would you do if someone built on your land without permission?